He's someone who may be able to speak to some of those disaffected voters who don't trust the Democratic Party because of those elite associations.
Right.
Whatever quibbles voters might have with Tim Walz, I don't think that will be one of them.
Let's go to the States, where Kamala Harris has picked her running mate. It is Tim Walz. He will be the Democratic candidate for vice president. He is the governor of Minnesota. Christopher Devine is an associate professor at Dayton University and the author of the book Do Running Mates Matter? Well, Christopher, if you could concisely answer your own question, that would help. Good afternoon to you.
And to you, big day in American politics here. I will try. It takes a whole book, but I will try to give the concise version here. So,
Yeah.
the question is certainly that running mates matter. They matter at the margins. They're not. You shouldn't expect them to be decisive in a race. They're not going to upend the race, as for example, John McCain thought in 2008 when he picked Sarah Palin. It was a really out of the box pick. It was referred to within his campaign as a potential game changer that would rescue him from what seemed to be a doomed campaign against Barack Obama at that point. I mean, look, that's overstating the case. Likewise, according to our research, choosing, for instance, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, probably the most important swing state in this election. A lot of people think that could have delivered Pennsylvania if she had just made the smart pick. Well, the evidence isn't really there that people vote based on geography in that way, or for that matter, being part of the same demographic group as a VP candidate and so on. Where the VP candidate really matters and where Tim Walz could really matter, I think for good here, but who knows? We'll see. We'll see how he plays out in the campaign trail. It's in terms of what he tells voters about Kamala Harris. Of course, they know her well as vice president, but she has not run as a leader in her own right for this position. Well, she had. She did not succeed in the primaries in
Yeah.
2020, but she's on the national stage in a different way here, trying to be a leader in her own right. What does Tim Walz tell us about her? I'll just give one thought here. He is a clearly credible vice president. I would say of the 6 finalists, he is the best qualified, having served in state and federal government. Unlike many of the others, including Shapiro, he has foreign policy experience. That's the kind of thing that voters really want to see in a VP pick, a responsible pick that says this person is serious about leading, not just about winning an election.
Right, okay. And he is an interesting contrast to J.D. Vance, isn't he? What would you say about the differences between the two men?
JD Vance is a very different type of character, in a lot of ways. Of course, Walz has called him weird, kind of coined that term and as applied to Republicans. I would again point to the experience part. There's a lot about Vance's comments and quirks and all that kind of stuff. But I think people should really focus on the fact that JD Vance does not have that kind of experience that I was just describing. This is someone who's holding his first political office. He's run for one in one election before in my home state of Ohio when he won the Senate just 2 years ago. He was sworn into the Senate early last year. He's someone who has political skills. He may have promise, although this campaign isn't helping so far, but he is not someone who immediately strikes voters, I suspect, as well qualified in the same way that Tim Walz will. That could actually be the biggest contrast. There's a lot of strategizing about Vance saying he's from Appalachia, kind of rural America, but then Walz could say he's really from rural America. He's from a small town. I don't know that voters are going to put a lot of stock into that comparison. But in terms of experience, I think they're going to look more fondly upon Kamala Harris's choice of a credible vice president than they will on Donald Trump's choice of a freshman senator.
Okay, interesting. And what about how he will be viewed, Waltz, by young people and people of colour who I think have been really galvanised by Kamala Harris? Are they going to take to him? Is he their sort of guy?
There's often this sense that in order to appeal to a group of voters, you have to be someone from that group. I would point to Bernie Sanders as a contrast, who was wildly popular among younger voters and really still is, and yet was quite old. Both times he ran for president. So Walz is 59. He looks a lot older than 59. I mean, sorry to say, same age as Kamala Harris, but she looks quite a bit younger and he looks older. So visually, I don't know what effect that has. But
Actually, I mean, it's an important point because he does look quite old. I was quite surprised when I saw him. It wasn't really what I was expecting.
Yeah, and he's an interesting guy. He kind of embraces this aesthetic of being, down to earth kind of guy. You see him at state fairs and dressed down and very informal and this could be a good way of appealing to people. If we want to talk about appealing to voters, if we think about those folks who maybe are not sold on the Democratic Party, maybe they're not thrilled with Donald Trump and his Republican Party either. But there are a lot of folks who feel like the Democratic Party is out of touch. It's a party of elites, economic and cultural elites who just don't get people who live where I do. They might say from a more rural area, from what's often called flyover country here in the Midwest or nearby. And Tim Walz is someone who has grown up in that space. He's someone who comes from a very small town. He was later a high school football coach and teacher. And he might strike voters. Again, we'll see how he rolls out. It's hard to predict exactly how voters will receive him. But he's someone who may be able to speak to some of those disaffected voters who don't trust the Democratic Party because of those elite associations.
Right.
Whatever quibbles voters might have with Tim Walz, I don't think that will be one of them.
And what will happen now? Will Harris and Walz tour the country, tour the important battleground states together?
So they've had the set for about a week, I think, saying that they will start off in Philadelphia today. They're also going to go to Michigan and western Wisconsin, nearby Minnesota, Walz's home state, and other places throughout the country, other key battlegrounds. They'll go south from there and so on. So they're going to go launch this tour as running mates often do. Once they're chosen, as a way of introducing this person to the American public. I think that's really key, not so much because those events in and of themselves are going to change votes. That's something else I study about campaign visits. I wouldn't expect a visit to Philadelphia to change how people vote in November. But what's really important, it's going to happen this week now that Walz has been picked, is introducing him, defining him for the American public. The Trump campaign did a bad job of defining J.D. Vance, and so other people got to define him, and that's part of his bad rollout. The Harris campaign has to be very intentional of giving a clear message about who Tim Walz is, because people just don't know who he is.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting because, of course, all the childless cat lady stuff came out, and it did Vance absolutely no favours at all with the majority of people. Of course, some people probably liked him even more. Trump's been a bit quiet. Where is he?
He seems to be campaigning less at the moment. Of course, we know that he loves to be on the campaign trail, so it's hard to know exactly what that is. I mean, I don't know. Maybe after the convention, he's taking some summer rest, as some people do. But he does need to get out there and do more. It's just talking about defining Tim Walz. What about defining Kamala Harris? Donald Trump has done a very poor job thus far of staying focused on a message about who Kamala Harris is. Look, this is part of electoral politics. If you don't define your opponent, they'll define themselves. And of course, they'll do it in your favor. So what is the case against Kamala Harris? He's touched on it at some points, but if anyone watched his convention speech, for instance, of course, this was before we knew that Harris would be the candidate, that he tends to ramble. He goes off in a lot of different directions. He just is not a disciplined public speaker. He has to stay on the teleprompter in order to do that, but then he goes off the teleprompter. So Trump has passed up that opportunity. The biggest headline he's made recently about Kamala Harris was this ridiculous comment about her somehow turning black, as he put it. He's got to get it together and stay focused, or he's going to have a muddled message. And Kamala Harris is going to do a more effective job of telling people who she is, plus now who Tim Walz is.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your expertise this afternoon. That's Christopher Devine, Associate Professor at Dayton University, and his book is called Do Running Mates Matter? Alistair Dorber is Washington correspondent for The Times and The Sunday Times. Very much the man who we want to hear from on this. Alistair, how would you describe Tim Walz to people who don't know him in, let's say, 3 words?
A liberal Midwesterner. I think it would be the best 3 words.
Okay, excellent. Is he on the scene very much? Was this expected? Would you have put money on him?
I would have put money on him from about yesterday morning onwards, but not before. He's really come out of nowhere, Tim Walz, as Kamala Harris's running mate. She was looking, and then there's a lot of discussion about Mark Kelly, the Arizona senator, and much more recently Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, who I think it was fair to assume everyone assumed would be the running mate until yesterday. And Tim Walz is a bit of a surprise. He offers the ticket something I think that neither Kelly nor Shapiro offer. He's an ex-military officer. He's the governor of a Midwestern rural state, which is predominantly white, and he served in Congress. His record is as a liberal. He's introduced things like free school meals. He's enshrined abortion rights in Minnesota. He's toughened gun laws, but he doesn't really have a state that Kamala Harris should be worrying about. If the Democrats don't win Minnesota in November, they're in trouble, and often running mates are picked to shore up support in whichever state they come from.
When Kamala Harris became the Democrat nominee, so much was said about the kind of person that she would need beside her, and a lot was made of her needing a kind of Biden light, an affable, white, middle-aged, maybe non-confrontational kind of a candidate. So has he kind of got the ticket on those grounds, really?
Well, he ticks all those boxes you just mentioned, but what he doesn't really do is offer much in terms of ideological difference to Kamala Harris. He is a progressive. He's seen as being on the left of the party. We've already had emails from the Trump campaign this morning calling him a dangerous liberal who will ruin America should he ever become vice president. He's very progressive on things like healthcare, abortion, gun rights, all that sort of stuff. All the things that I think Kamala Harris would automatically agree with. And one of the arguments for picking someone who's not quite like her ideologically is that you get reach into groups of independent voters that might be considering voting either Republican or Democrat. She's picked someone that's got very similar views to her, and we now have certainly for the next 3 months an election which will be divided very much on ideological grounds. On the left, you'll have Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and much further off to the right, you'll have Donald Trump and JD Vance, his running mate.